My wife told me she needed to sleep at a coworker's apartment because her company retreat was running late. The text came at exactly 7:45 p.m. on a Thursday evening that had started like any other ordinary day in our 9-year marriage, and I remember staring at those words on my phone screen while sitting in our Denver apartment, feeling something cold and unsettling settle in my stomach like I'd just swallowed ice water on an empty stomach. Brooke had never once stayed out overnight without discussing it with me first, not once in all our years together, and certainly not on a work night when she usually complained about being exhausted by 6 p.m. and wanting nothing more than to collapse on our sectional couch with a glass of the expensive Pinot Grigio she'd developed a taste for and mindless reality television that helped her unwind from what she claimed were increasingly stressful days at her marketing job. I read her message 3 times, each reading making it sound more rehearsed and less believable, while sitting in the living room we'd spent months decorating together when we first moved in, surrounded by furniture we'd picked out during weekend trips to various stores around Denver, photographs from our wedding day displayed on the mantel above the fireplace we'd never actually used, and the throw pillows she'd insisted we needed to make the space feel more homey and welcoming for the future. Family we talked about starting once we felt more financially stable and ready for the responsibility of raising children together. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm located in one of those generic glass office buildings downtown, the kind of place where everyone dressed in business casual attire and spent their days creating PowerPoint presentations for clients who probably never looked at them carefully, and their company events were notorious for wrapping up by 8 p.m. sharp because the executives had families to get home to and the company was notoriously cheap when it came to overtime. Expenses, extended catering costs, or any expenditure that didn't directly contribute to their bottom line profitability. Something felt fundamentally wrong about this entire situation, like a puzzle piece that had been forced into the wrong spot and was obviously out of place to anyone who bothered to look carefully, and my 6 years working as an apartment leasing specialist had taught me to read people's motivations and inconsistencies pretty well, especially when someone was trying to convince me of something that didn't align with the facts or their previous behavior patterns. When people lie, they usually over-explain or under-explain, and Brooke's text fell squarely into the under-explain category, providing just enough information to sound plausible while avoiding any details that could be verified or questioned later if her story fell apart under scrutiny. The message felt rehearsed and impersonal, nothing like the way she usually communicated with me through text, lacking the little emoticons she typically used or the casual, affectionate tone that had characterized our communication throughout our relationship, even during periods when we were annoyed with each other or dealing with stress from work or family obligations. I decided to respond strategically rather than emotionally, taking a few minutes to consider my options before typing back that I wasn't going to be alone tonight either, a response that was technically true since I was expecting a grocery delivery later and might have some work calls to handle, but more importantly, it was designed to see how she'd react to information that shouldn't have caused any concern if her story about being stuck at a legitimate work event was actually true. Within 3 minutes of sending my response, my phone was buzzing insistently with an incoming call from her, the kind of urgent, repetitive ringing that suggested panic rather than casual conversation, the sound cutting through the quiet evening like an alarm clock going off unexpectedly in the middle of a peaceful afternoon. I let it go straight to voicemail, partially because I was curious to hear what explanation she'd provide when forced to speak without my immediate input or questions, but mostly because I wanted to see how desperate she'd become when I didn't immediately pick up and provide her with whatever reassurance or information she was seeking to determine whether her plans for the evening were in jeopardy. If she was being honest about her situation and genuinely stuck at a work retreat that had run longer than expected, why would she be calling me so frantically after my perfectly innocent response about having company tonight? The urgency in her reaction told me everything I needed to know about what was really happening, confirming my growing suspicion that this retreat story was complete fabrication designed to cover up something much more serious and potentially relationship-ending than simple overtime work obligations or unexpected professional commitments that sometimes happen in corporate environments. 25 minutes after Brooke's frantic phone call, my doorbell chimed with the familiar two-note melody that usually brought me comfort and reminded me of family connections and happy occasions. But tonight it felt like perfect timing orchestrated by some cosmic force that wanted to expose whatever deception my wife had been planning behind my back while I sat in our apartment believing we were building something honest and meaningful together. I opened the heavy wooden door to find Sage, Brooke's 26-year-old sister, standing there with her characteristic bright smile that could light up any room, holding a bottle of expensive imported wine in one perfectly manicured hand and a brown paper grocery bag filled with gourmet ingredients in the other, her expression faltering slightly when she noticed my somewhat confused and distracted demeanor and the fact that I was still wearing my business casual work clothes instead of the comfortable jeans and polo shirt I usually changed into before family gatherings that were supposed to be relaxed and informal. Behind her stood Helen, my mother-in-law, a woman in her early 60s who had managed to maintain an air of elegant dignity despite raising 3 children as a single mother after losing her husband in a tragic construction accident 15 years earlier, carrying her signature beef Wellington in a covered glass dish that she'd probably spent the entire afternoon preparing with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything in her life, from her perfectly maintained flower garden that won neighborhood contests every summer to her color-coordinated kitchen that looked like something straight out of a home decorating magazine or a cooking show set. This was our monthly family dinner tradition that Brooke had specifically requested just last week during our usual Sunday brunch at that little cafe downtown with the exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage furniture, claiming with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm that she missed spending quality time with everyone due to her increasingly demanding work schedule that seemed to consume more and more of her evenings and weekends, leaving less time for the family relationships she claimed to value above everything else in her life and wanted to prioritize before everyone got too busy with their own lives to maintain these important connections. The irony of the situation wasn't completely lost on me as I stepped aside to let them both into our apartment, knowing that my wife should be here right now bustling around the kitchen, setting the table with our good china and crystal wine glasses while talking excitedly about her recent work projects and asking Helen about her volunteer activities at the local animal shelter where she'd been donating her time for the past 5 years, but instead she was apparently prioritizing whatever was really happening tonight over the family gathering she'd insisted we needed to maintain as a cornerstone of our relationship with her relatives and an important tradition that would keep us all connected as we moved forward in our lives. I explained Brooke's sudden change of plans in as neutral a tone as I could manage while retrieving our good wine glasses from the cabinet where we kept our special occasion dishware, the ones we'd received as wedding gifts from her grandmother, along with the matching dinner plates and serving pieces that only came out for holidays and important family events. Watching both women exchange the kind of concerned glances that told me they found her story just as suspicious and completely out of character as I did, given that Brooke had never missed one of these monthly dinners in the 3 years since we'd established the tradition. Helen had raised 3 children with wisdom born from necessity and experience, and she possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect when someone wasn't being completely truthful, a skill she'd developed through years of dealing with teenagers who thought they could outsmart her with elaborate stories and carefully constructed alibis that always seemed to fall apart under her gentle but persistent questioning. Sage had always been fiercely protective of family relationships and took these monthly dinners seriously as one of the most important ways to stay connected despite everyone's busy lives and competing priorities, often driving more than an hour through Denver's notorious rush hour traffic and rearranging her own work schedule to make sure she never missed an opportunity to spend time with the people who mattered most to her and maintain the close-knit family bonds that had helped them all survive their father's unexpected death and the financial struggles that followed. Just as we were settling down to eat Helen's perfectly prepared beef Wellington and beginning to discuss Sage's recent promotion at her graphic design firm where she'd been working on a major rebranding project for a local nonprofit organization that provided housing assistance to homeless veterans, we heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming in our apartment complex parking lot with considerably more force than necessary, followed by the rapid clicking of heels on concrete walkway. That sounded like someone running while wearing expensive shoes and the familiar jingle of Brooke's oversized keychain as she apparently struggled to find the right key in what sounded like a state of complete panic and mounting desperation. The front door burst open with dramatic timing that would have been comical in a romantic comedy but felt ominous and potentially life-altering in the context of our current situation. And there stood my wife looking absolutely stunning in an outfit that had clearly been chosen with meticulous care to impress someone special rather than attend a boring corporate retreat that supposedly ran late and required her to sleep at a colleague's apartment for convenience and safety reasons. Her makeup was flawless and sophisticated, featuring the kind of careful application and attention to detail she usually reserved for the most important occasions like job interviews, anniversary celebrations, or formal events where appearance mattered significantly. The sort of look that takes at least an hour to achieve and involves multiple layers of expensive cosmetics she'd accumulated over the past few years during shopping trips that I'd funded without question or complaint. Her blonde hair had been professionally styled into loose, romantic waves that definitely hadn't happened in any office bathroom or hotel room but required the kind of salon treatment she usually scheduled weeks in advance and cost more than many people's weekly grocery budget, the type of styling that was meant to look effortlessly beautiful while actually requiring significant time, skill, and financial investment to achieve. She was wearing the elegant black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary celebration last year, the one that had cost more than most people's monthly car payments and made her look like she belonged at a red carpet premiere or exclusive gala rather than a company retreat in some generic hotel conference room, paired with the designer heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent payments and were definitely not appropriate for standing around at corporate events or walking on hotel carpeting for extended periods of time. She froze completely in our doorway when she saw the three of us seated around our dining table with wine glasses raised in an informal toast, Helen's signature meal spread out before us on the good china we only used for special family occasions, her face cycling rapidly through shock, confusion, and what I could only describe as pure panic as the reality of the situation hit her with the force of a freight train carrying everything she'd been trying to hide for months crashing into her carefully constructed evening plans. I calmly raised my wine glass in her direction with deliberate precision and delivered the line I'd been mentally rehearsing since her frantic phone call earlier, explaining in a measured tone that I wasn't alone tonight either and that her timing was absolutely perfect for our monthly family dinner that she'd specifically requested just last week while we were having brunch at that cozy downtown cafe where she'd seemed so excited about maintaining family traditions and staying connected to them. People who supposedly mattered most to her above all other considerations. Brooke began stammering something about her colleague's story and how the corporate retreat had ended earlier than expected due to some kind of scheduling conflict or venue issue that had forced everyone to disperse to their homes or alternative accommodations. But her words sounded increasingly hollow and desperate as she realized that her carefully constructed lie was falling apart in real time in front of the three people whose opinions mattered most to her and whose disappointment would hurt more than anything else in the world because they loved her unconditionally and had supported her through every challenge and setback in her adult life. Helen set down her fork and knife with the kind of deliberate precision that indicated she was processing information and drawing conclusions based on decades of experience reading people and situations, her expression shifting from maternal concern to growing disappointment as she began to understand that something much more serious than a work emergency was unfolding in front of her eyes. Sage's eyes moved back and forth between her sister and me like she was watching the final moments of a championship tennis match that would determine someone's entire future, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by confusion and growing alarm as she tried to reconcile the woman standing in our doorway with the sister she'd known and trusted her entire life. That's when I decided to drop the bombshell that would change everything and expose the months of deception that had been eating away at our marriage like a cancer growing silently in the shadows, calmly mentioning that our shared cloud account had been automatically syncing all her text messages to my laptop for months, and I'd become particularly interested in her conversations with Trevor from the marketing department who seemed to have quite a lot to say about her appearance, her marriage, and suggestions for private meetings outside of work hours that had absolutely nothing to do with professional collaboration or legitimate business purposes that could justify the intimate tone of their communications. Brooke's face drained of all color like someone had literally pulled a plug somewhere inside her body and watched all the blood rush out at once. and I watched her hands begin to shake uncontrollably as she realized the full scope of what I discovered through technology she'd completely forgotten about when she eagerly set up our shared Apple account 2 years ago during a romantic weekend when we'd been talking about combining our lives more completely and sharing everything as a symbol of our commitment and trust in each other. I recited specific details from her flirtatious conversations with Trevor in a calm, measured voice that contrasted sharply with the explosive and relationship-destroying nature of the content I was revealing to her family, including his compliments about how beautiful she looked in the red sweater she wore last Tuesday and her response about how she wished he could see her in something even more revealing and intimate, along with their detailed discussion about meeting at his apartment tonight. While his wife and children were conveniently visiting relatives in Colorado Springs for their annual family reunion that would give them the perfect opportunity to finally consummate the emotional affair they'd been conducting for months through text messages and secret phone calls during work hours. Sage nearly choked on her wine and had to grab her cloth napkin to keep from spitting the expensive vintage across Helen's carefully prepared meal and the antique lace tablecloth that had been passed down through 3 generations of their family, while my mother-in-law set down her silver utensils with a look of profound disappointment and betrayal that seemed to age her several years in the span of just a few seconds, the kind of expression that comes from realizing that someone you love and trusted unconditionally has been living an elaborate lie right in front of you for months without your knowledge or suspicion. The dining room filled with the kind of suffocating tension that makes everyone hyper-aware of every small sound, from the gentle hum of our stainless steel refrigerator to the distant traffic outside our apartment complex and the ticking of the antique clock on our mantel that Brooke had inherited from her grandmother, while my wife stood there in her carefully chosen seduction outfit realizing that her months of secret conversations and detailed planning for tonight's romantic encounter had been completely exposed to the 3 people whose opinions mattered most to her and whose love and respect she'd taken for granted while pursuing someone else's attention and validation. I continued reading excerpts from their intimate message exchange, describing how Trevor had systematically convinced her that she deserved someone who appreciated her properly and understood her needs better than her current husband, and how she'd gradually opened up about her growing dissatisfaction with our marriage and her increasing belief that she'd settled too early in life and missed out on the kind of passionate, exciting connection she'd always dreamed about finding with someone who truly understood her deepest desires and professional ambitions. The messages revealed months of careful emotional manipulation and grooming, with Trevor slowly isolating her from her satisfaction with our relationship while positioning himself as the understanding confidant who could offer her everything she felt was missing in her life. While she gradually shared more intimate details about our private conversations and her growing belief that our marriage was holding her back from becoming the person she was meant to be in a world full of exciting possibilities and passionate connections. Helen finally broke the deafening silence by asking Brooke directly in her stern but loving maternal voice if these messages were real and accurate representations of her feelings and intentions, and if she had any reasonable explanation for the level of intimacy, future planning, and outright betrayal they revealed about her secret relationship with a married coworker, and my wife's complete inability to deny the evidence or offer any believable explanation told us everything we needed to know about the depth of her betrayal and the months of careful calculation that had gone into tonight's elaborate deception. Sage immediately pulled out her iPhone and called their older brother Cole, who lived just 15 minutes away in a modest 2-bedroom townhouse he'd been slowly renovating on weekends with his construction skills and had always served as the family's voice of reason during major crisis situations, from their father's sudden death 10 years ago to various family financial emergencies and relationship problems that required someone with a level head, practical perspective, and the moral authority to help navigate complicated emotional situations without making them worse through poor judgment or emotional reactions. She explained the unfolding situation in hushed, urgent tones while Brooke collapsed into the chair I'd originally set for her with tears streaming down her perfectly applied makeup, creating dark mascara streaks that made her look like a tragic character in some melodramatic soap opera about betrayal, deception, and family dysfunction that would be entertaining if it weren't destroying real lives and relationships that had taken years to build and nurture. Cole arrived within 30 minutes of Sage's call, Still wearing his dusty work clothes from his job as a construction supervisor where he'd been putting in 12-hour days to finish a major commercial project before the approaching winter weather made outdoor construction work more difficult, expensive, and potentially dangerous for his crew. And the moment he walked through our front door and saw his sister's tear-stained face alongside the three of us sitting in stunned silence around a dinner table that should have been filled with laughter, family stories, and warm conversation, he immediately grasped the gravity of what was happening without needing a detailed explanation of the evening's revelations. I watched Brooke finally break down completely under the weight of her family's disappointed stares and mounting evidence, admitting through broken sobs that she had indeed developed romantic feelings for Trevor over the past several months, and that tonight she had planned to spend the night at his apartment while his wife and children were conveniently out of town visiting relatives she'd never bothered to meet despite hearing countless stories about them and seeing family photos displayed prominently in Trevor's office cubicle during the few times I'd visited Brooke's workplace for company parties or special events. Her confession came out in fragmented sentences between heaving sobs that sounded more like someone mourning the loss of their secret fantasy relationship than expressing genuine remorse for the devastating pain they'd caused to people who loved them unconditionally and had supported them through every challenge, setback, and difficult transition in their adult lives without ever questioning their loyalty or commitment to the family bond they'd all worked so hard to maintain. I found myself feeling oddly detached from the emotional chaos unfolding in what had been our peaceful home just a few hours earlier before everything exploded into this nightmare of exposed lies, shattered trust, and family confrontation that would change all of our relationships forever in ways none of us could have anticipated when we'd planned this simple family dinner. Cole demanded in his authoritative older brother voice that she call Trevor immediately and put the phone on speaker so everyone present could hear exactly what kind of man she'd been planning to betray our 9-year marriage for, and when Trevor answered with the words that would be burned into all of our memories forever, his voice dripping with anticipation and sexual expectation, "Hey gorgeous, are you almost here? I've got your favorite wine chilling in the refrigerator and I can't wait to finally have you all to myself tonight without having to worry about your husband or anyone else interrupting our time together." The entire room fell into the kind of absolute silence that comes before a devastating thunderstorm when the air pressure changes dramatically and everyone can feel something terrible and destructive approaching on the horizon. The raw evidence of their intimate planning and the casually possessive way Trevor spoke to my wife like she was already his girlfriend and they were just another normal couple planning a romantic evening together hit Cole like a physical blow to his moral sensibilities, and he expressed his complete disgust and outrage with language that made Helen wince while Sage stared at her sister like she was looking at a complete stranger who happened to share her DNA but possessed none of the values, moral compass, or basic decency they'd been raised with in their close-knit family. I quietly informed everyone present that our marriage was officially over and that I would be filing for divorce as soon as possible through my attorney, feeling a strange sense of relief and liberation wash over me as I finally spoke the words I'd been avoiding and dreading for months while watching our relationship deteriorate into something I no longer recognized, respected, or wanted to fight for. Something that had become more about maintaining appearances and avoiding difficult conversations than actually building a future together based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine emotional connection. The next morning I gave Brooke exactly 1 week to find alternative living arrangements and remove all of her belongings from our shared apartment, calmly reminding her that only my name appeared on our lease agreement due to her poor credit history and significant student loan debt that had prevented her from qualifying as a co-signer when we'd moved in together 3 years ago after deciding we were ready to take the next major step in our relationship and create a shared living space that reflected our combined tastes, values, and long-term plans for building a life together. Helen stepped up immediately with the kind of maternal responsibility and practical wisdom that had helped her successfully raise 3 children as a single mother, offering temporary housing at her own apartment with strict conditions that included absolutely no contact with married men under any circumstances, finding full-time employment within 30 days to support herself financially and prove she was taking genuine responsibility for her choices and their consequences, and complete honesty about her whereabouts at all times, essentially treating her grown daughter like a teenager who had violated every family rule simultaneously and could no longer be trusted to make responsible decisions without close supervision and accountability. Over the following days, Brooke made increasingly desperate attempts to salvage our relationship through a combination of emotional manipulation tactics that ranged from tearful apologies about making a terrible mistake that didn't represent who she really was, to angry accusations that I was being unreasonably harsh and unforgiving about what she characterized as a momentary lapse in judgment, along with elaborate promises to cut off all contact with Trevor permanently and attend intensive marriage counseling sessions if I would just give her one more chance to prove she could change and become the devoted wife I deserve to have for the rest of our lives together. I remained completely resolute in my decision to end our marriage permanently, feeling more certain and confident with each passing day that I'd made the right choice as I watched her cycle through every emotional manipulation strategy in her extensive playbook without ever taking genuine responsibility for the months of careful planning, systematic deception, and deliberate betrayal that had led to this moment, or acknowledging the profound violation of trust and basic marital vows that couldn't be repaired with simple apologies or promises to do better in an uncertain future. She tried desperately enlisting both Sage and Cole to intercede on her behalf, hoping that family pressure and guilt might somehow convince me to reconsider my decision and give her another opportunity to repair the damage she'd done. But both siblings made it absolutely clear that they fully supported my choice to divorce their sister and felt she'd brought this devastating situation entirely upon herself through choices that reflected poorly on how they'd all been raised to treat relationships, commitments, and the people who loved them most in the world with honesty and respect. Trevor apparently disappeared from the picture completely once he realized that their secret affair had been dramatically exposed to both families and that the serious consequences of his actions might affect his own marriage, professional reputation, and financial stability, proving conclusively that his interest in Brooke had been purely opportunistic and self-serving rather than the deep emotional connection and genuine love she'd convinced herself they shared during their months of secret conversations about building an exciting future together. Brooke eventually moved out with Cole's reluctant assistance, packing her belongings while I was at work to avoid the awkwardness and potential drama of another emotional confrontation that might involve more desperate tears, angry accusations, or last-minute attempts to change my mind through emotional manipulation or promises she had no realistic intention or ability to keep. And I returned home that evening to find an apartment that felt immediately lighter and more peaceful than it had in many months, like someone had finally opened all the windows and doors to let fresh air circulate through rooms that had been suffocating under the weight of lies, resentment, and unspoken tension. The relief I felt was overwhelming and immediate, making me realize for the first time how much chronic stress and anxiety I'd been carrying around without even recognizing it as abnormal, constantly wondering what Brooke was really doing when she claimed to be working late or attending company events. And for the first time in many months I could envision a future that didn't involve walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable mood swings or second-guessing every conversation and explanation she offered about her whereabouts and activities. 4 months later my divorce was completely finalized and I had transformed my entire life with regular fitness routines that helped me regain confidence I didn't even realize I'd lost during the final year of my marriage, a promotion to senior leasing coordinator that came with a substantial raise and the opportunity to work with high-end properties in Denver's most desirable neighborhoods, and a genuine sense of peace that settled over me like finally finding the right temperature after months of being too hot or too cold without understanding why I felt so uncomfortable in my own life. I was shopping at the weekend farmers market near downtown Denver, something I'd started doing as part of my new routine of actually enjoying my weekends instead of walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable mood swings or trying to decode hidden meanings in every conversation we had about future plans and relationship goals, when I accidentally encountered Laura, Trevor's ex-wife, who recognized me from a company party Brooke had dragged me to several months before everything fell apart and our marriage imploded in the most dramatic way possible. Laura approached me with a grateful smile and thanked me for exposing the affair, explaining that Trevor had actually been cheating with multiple women for years and my discovery had finally given her the evidence and courage she needed to leave him and protect her children from his toxic behavior patterns and constant lies about working late or attending business meetings that were really just cover stories for his various affairs with colleagues and acquaintances. She told me that Trevor had been fired from his marketing position just 2 weeks after our confrontation when their company discovered he'd been using company time and resources to conduct multiple affairs with female colleagues, and that Brooke had been just one of several women he'd been manipulating simultaneously with promises of leaving his wife and building a future together that he never intended to keep, treating marriage as just another obstacle to overcome in his pursuit of excitement and validation. I learned that Brooke had made several desperate attempts to contact Trevor after our divorce proceedings began, sending him emails and text messages begging him to honor the promises he'd made about their relationship, but he'd blocked her completely once the consequences of his actions started affecting his professional reputation and financial stability, leaving her to face the reality that she'd destroyed her marriage for someone who viewed her as completely disposable and interchangeable with any other woman willing to believe his lies. Brooke had been sending me increasingly desperate emails through her work account since I'd blocked her personal communications completely, begging me to consider reconciliation and claiming she'd learned valuable lessons about what really mattered in relationships. But I maintained firm boundaries and eventually blocked those accounts as well because I had no interest in reliving the pain and betrayal she'd caused or giving her false hope that our relationship could ever be repaired. Helen continued inviting me to their monthly family dinners as an honorary member, and I accepted these invitations because I genuinely enjoyed spending time with people who valued honesty and loyalty above convenience and excitement, finding in Brooke's family the kind of stability and authentic connection that I'd been missing in my marriage for far longer than I'd been willing to admit to myself or anyone else. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I felt completely confident that I'd made the right decision. And I could honestly say that the dramatic confrontation that night had been the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it had felt devastating and world-ending in the moment when everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my wife's character was revealed to be built on lies and deception that had been carefully maintained for months while she planned her escape to what she thought would be a better life with someone else.